Okay. My name is Josh McDavid. Welcome back to my channel for those of you who have been here before, and for those of you who have not, welcome to my channel for the first time. In my first video, this is my second video. In my first video, I went over my first shelf of my library, and what I did is just describe some of the books that I have read and found useful, found interesting, found influential, and I have tried to just describe them, and hopefully somebody can gain some sort of knowledge from those and inform themselves on whether or not they would like to, purchase those books, read those books. Totally just throwing this out there because I know I have gained useful insight and knowledge from reading certain books that have been recommended to me. So, that said, this is video number 2 in my series of my library tour, my bookshelf tour. And I will show you the second shelf, at least, is my goal, and what books I have on that shelf. Let me go over here. Here's, again, if you watched the first video, this is my bookshelf that I built about a year ago now. When I first built it, there were, I would say, books on the top 2 shelves, and the rest had not been filled. Since then, I've really taken an interest in buying books, and so obviously we've got 3 shelves now filled. 3 additional shelves, that is. So that's it. Second shelf, first shelf, as a review, American history. A lot of biographies. I would say my primary interest when it comes to American history would be the American Revolution, and secondary would be probably the Civil War. I've also read a little bit on the World War I, World War II, but those right now, those thus far, they're not as interesting, not as much up my alley as kind of earlier American history. Okay, that's it. First shelf here, we have the Book of Enoch. Book of Enoch is referenced in the Bible. I believe it's Jude that references it. It did not make the canon. I'm not sure why. However, it's very interesting. What I would say is that stands out from it is the fact that it talks about how, and this is also referenced in Genesis, briefly alluded to, how fallen angels actually mated with the with the daughters of man, and created this offspring that was or became giants. And Goliath would have been a descendant, if you remember the story of David and Goliath, of that those fallen angels and daughters of man. What is interesting is it discusses how these angels actually taught mankind various skills, various, let's say, divine skill sets. The 2 that kind of stand out in my mind are, for women, it taught them how to adorn. They taught them how to adorn themselves, how to use makeup to control, honestly, appeal to, attract, control men, how to kind of cast a spell, this divine spell with their sexuality. So taught them what to wear and how to fix their hair and the makeup to put on and the attire to wear, the jewelry, all of these things to kind of control men. And for men, I remember one was, I believe, metallurgy, and how to use the resources within the earth for our benefit, how to create tools for our benefit. And so that was something that was supposedly taught to men by these fallen angels that God had kicked out of heaven once they decided to follow Lucifer. So yeah, Book of Enoch, very interesting. They also talk about a lot about like astronomy and seasons and moon phases and like the natural order of things, the cyclical order of things, and how they relate to the heavenlies and how they relate to mankind and prophecies. So it also, I think, goes into a prophecy of, and by the way, Enoch, for all of those who don't know, he was the father of Methuselah, who was the oldest man referenced in the Bible. He died at 969 years old. And Enoch, actually, the Bible says in Genesis that he walked so close with God that he was not. So God took him because he was so close with God. He was so heavenly, so divine, God just took him. And so this book is actually attributed to him. He says that that he's writing it. Enoch is writing it. And so he also gives you like prophecies about what seems to be Noah's flood and about the Lamb of God and this is all written pre-Christ. So yeah, it's very interesting. Pick it up if you're interested in that type of thing. I'll just go to the books that a lot of these need purged out, honestly. A lot of these I've read parts of them, and as I've matured and evolved and gotten more into depth in my faith, my Christian faith, some of them about Christian living, but just some of them are probably either off base a little bit, like The Shack, or they just probably are not the meat that I need anymore. The doctrine is too superficial. So I'll give you the books that I would actually recommend on this shelf. So we have, The Shack. I would not. There's a movie about it, which definitely was a tearjerker, and it had some good things, but I think it was a little sacrilegious in the way that it portrayed God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus as just like everyday people, and some of the lines in there, I would say, are not biblical at all. Resolution for Men. That is something I'm passionate about, is men, and the fact that we need to step up in our families, for our wives and for our children, in our communities, in our churches, in our government. I think we've abdicated leadership for far too long, and so that's what this book is about, is coming to a resolution, resolving that we will be men who lead our families well, the way that we are told to in the scriptures. So I do recommend that. There's also a movie that I think this is based off of. Orthodoxy. This is called Orthodoxy. It's by G.K. Chesterton. So G.K. Chesterton, I'm a huge fan of him. He ended up being a Catholic. This book is really a defense of Orthodox Christianity, of how he kind of came to the faith. He's very philosophical in his conclusions to why Christianity is true. He's also scientific. He's also just he uses common sense and charm and like a winsomeness that would just fill you, and it would just be like, duh, when you read it. You're like, man, why didn't I think of that? So he's just very interesting, very colorful, but yet his end goal is truth, and his conclusions I generally agree with. So I highly recommend anything written by G.K. Chesterton, but especially Orthodoxy. Let's see. Okay. And then next, we'll go to Love and Respect. This is just based on the premise that, and it's biblical, that wives are supposed to respect their husbands, show their husbands respect. Men are supposed to love their wives like Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. And so this is just basically saying that women long for love, to know they're loved, for their husbands to show that they love them. Men, on the other hand, long for respect, and for their wives to show respect, even maybe adoration. And so just basically why those are needs, and how men and women, husband and wife, are different, and how to show those fundamental needs toward the one spouse, or how to, let's say, fulfill them. Bonhoeffer, have not read it, by Eric Metaxas. I know Bonhoeffer was a pastor, a martyr, a spy even, during the Nazi regime in Germany. And he ultimately was killed for, I believe, being discovered. And he never backed down, though. He never strayed from his beliefs. He was anti-Hitler, I believe, pretty early on. So I can't say I highly recommend it, but I know Eric Metaxas is a good thinker, interesting thinker. So I would imagine that this is it looks pretty in depth. I do look forward to eventually reading it. 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. So this book I have read. It's about how each individual in a marriage has a love language, and more than one, but maybe a primary one, and then secondary, and so on and so forth one. But that there are 5 love languages is his premise that he puts forward. They are acts of service, so that's showing that you love someone by performing an act of service. Maybe that's taking off the shoes of your husband or wife and massaging their feet. Maybe that's doing the dishes. That's that person's love language. The next is gifts. There's one that's gifts, giving of gifts. I guess that also just says, hey, I thought of you. The next is showing affection, physical contact, holding of the hand, putting your arm around your spouse, your significant other. Another one is quality time, making time to spend with your husband or wife. And then the final one is words of affirmation. I think that is probably big for men, because it goes hand in hand with that respect that we were talking about. If a wife is able to compliment her man, it shows that she respects him. Now, a man needs to also be deserving of respect in so many ways. Like I think naturally that he should be respected, yes. However, if he is dropping the ball in certain areas, then I think his wife will naturally lose some respect. She still needs to have a degree of respect, and as should the husband for the wife. But I think, those two go hand in hand is my whole point. I don't want to go down some tangent there. Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren. I read that a long time ago, back in high school. I remember it was pretty good at the time. I'm not sure if I would recommend it, though. John's Story, it was pretty good. It's called the John's Story, The Last Eyewitness by Tim LaHaye. I believe Tim LaHaye, at least, he wrote the Left Behind series. This is specifically a historical fiction about John, Jesus' disciple, and basically about his time on the island of Patmos when God gave him the book of Revelation. So it's pretty interesting. All right, let me try to get through these a little faster. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've not read this. I know the Dead Sea Scrolls were scrolls found in caves along the Dead Sea, and that they showed that the scriptures had been transcribed by scribes fairly accurately throughout time. And so I know that some people who are skeptics, they'll say, well, there have been either mistranslations or additions to scriptures, and we know now, finding these especially, that that's not so much the case, that the integrity of the scriptures has, thus far, that we can tell, been kept intact. And whenever they haven't, then Christians will admit that, it seems to me. And whenever you read, certain Bibles with commentaries, they will actually allude to the fact that, hey, some of the original manuscripts didn't have this, and this may have been an addition. So yeah, very interesting if you want to ever research the Dead Sea Scrolls. Next, we have C.S. Lewis in a collection of his books. We have Mere Christianity, Miracles, The Problem of Pain, The Screwtape Letters, The Grief Observed, man, and The Great Divorce. I've read, I think, a few of these. So Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis, by the way, he was, I would call him a professor, literary professor, atheist that turned Christian. He was a philosopher. He sometimes gave maybe political commentary. Mere Christianity is great. It's about the basic tenets of Christianity, no matter the denomination. He tries to give proofs of Christianity through I would say, rational framework of reason. He kind of tries to get to the bottom of how these things could be true by reasoning to them. And also, he gives a lot of analogies, I remember, that are helpful in him describing the basic tenets of Christianity and why he believes what he believes and why Christians in general believe what they believe. Haven't read Miracles. The Problem of Pain, he gets at, well, why is pain in the world? What's the purpose of pain? If there's a loving God, why would he allow pain? So he asks some hard questions, and I think he does a pretty good job at trying to answer them. Screwtape Letters, highly recommend. It's so good. That comes from the perspective of two demons, and they are assigned human beings, and this is the case for every human being. And then what they call them their patients, and what they do is they try to basically steal that person's soul and prohibit God or inhibit God from winning them over, from them having salvation through Jesus Christ. And so how they do this is very strategic. They're always discussing, they call God the enemy throughout, and they're always discussing like how to throw this person off course, how to basically destroy their life, how to ruin their life, how to get into their thought life, and to cause them to misread certain situations, such as, let's say, the tone of voice that their husband or wife gives them, and how to use something like that small to then start a trajectory away from holiness, away from godliness, away from a life that is good and that is true and that is productive and that is holy, into a life of let's say that starts to deteriorate. So yeah, very good. Highly recommend. Grief Observed. So his wife died. C.S. Lewis's wife died. This is Grief Observed. And so he starts questioning, well, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings right now? Or what are my hopes? And he tries to flesh all of that out in the midst of his grief. The Great Divorce. I've read part of it. It's okay. It's about a bunch of people that die and how once they die in the afterlife, they either become more heavenly, more divine, or more hellish and more depraved. And so I think it plays on his belief in purgatory. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting book. So yeah, those are the C.S. Lewis books. All right, next we have, let's skip over Husband After God's Own Heart. Skip over Fireproof. Every Man's Battle, about men's battle with lust, specifically also with pornography or maybe with fornication, and how men are just visual in their sexuality. And so it discusses different ways to battle that. World Religions, let's see, 5 Marks of Man. Okay, Through the Eyes of a Lion, Levi Lusko. I really appreciate Levi Lusko. So this is about his daughter passing away, young daughter. And it's been a while since I've read it, but it's just kind of similar to C.S. Lewis's Grief Observed, where he's just trying to question why did this happen? What's the purpose? How can this be used for good? Chokes you up a little bit, just putting yourself in his shoes. Let's see. Everlasting Man. This is another G.K. Chesterton book. This is I can't remember. I think it's like a play on words, though. It's a play on words in that it's talking about how Jesus is the everlasting man, but also how I can't remember. Maybe how like um, we're all going to be everlasting. I believe we're all eternal. And so, again, with his work, it's very philosophical, very winsome. He integrates history to prove his point about Christianity, which he was a firm believer in. Let's see. Story of Reality. I think this is maybe Greg Koukl. It's pretty good. He talks about how basically all of our stories follow the same type of pattern, whether they're in movies or literature. And that's because they're all based upon upon reality, like one story, a heroic, redemptive story, and that is the story of Christ. So that's what that's about. Letter from a Skeptic, read that a long time ago, and this is a Christian having a back and forth dialogue through letters with his father. And his father was a skeptic, and he asked some really pertinent questions, some really hard questions, because he doesn't believe in God, about how God could allow certain things to happen in the world. And I recommend it. It's pretty good. Eventually his dad did become a believer. He did convert. Let me see if I can find The Marks of a Man. I mean, I've told you guys in the first video, I'm passionate about men taking responsibility, leading. Believe me, I have a lot of work to do in that area. But 5 Marks of a Man by Brian Tome. He was my a pastor at a former church I went to. Pretty good. He just talks about basically how men need to, I think, be team players, and they need to. What else did he say? But let's see. Come on. Oh yeah, one was take a stand, even when it's against the flow. Okay, he has a vision. He's a team player. He works hard. Has courage to take a minority position. That's the take a stand, and that he is a protector. While the boy lives day to day. He wants to be the MVP, so he's not a team player. He plays rather than works, wants the reassurance of the crowd, so he goes with the flow, with the mob, right? The mob mentality, even if it's against his principles and convictions. And he's a predator instead of a protector. So, yeah, I've read this a couple times. It's pretty good. Again, if you're a young man or an older one and you feel like there's some gaps in your life where you're lacking integrity and you know that you need to become more manly, then, and I mean that in the sense of not like physically, but spiritually, then I would recommend picking this up. Okay. All right. Let's see where we're at next. Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis. Very good. I just would recommend picking this up because he's talking about how we've started to undermine things like beauty for some sort of, I would say, colder reality. And things, we've become very technical as science has advanced, which has been a great thing, science has, but we've lost something. We've lost like our soulish nature and like objective truth, such as in his view, morality. And that I would really have to break this open and read passages, excerpts, which maybe I'll do in the future of some of my favorite books if people are interested. Next we have Confessions, St. Augustine. Read part of that. It's pretty good. Let's see. Sacred Fire. Oh, Raising an Original. Let's talk about that. Raising an Original by Julie Lyles Carr. She talks about the personalities of children and how one size fits all cannot work when trying to raise a child, and that you have to first kind of understand your child and what makes them tick, what their strengths are and weaknesses are, and accommodate those things when you're trying to raise your children so that they can become the best version of themselves because they're all so unique. They're all so original, and I totally agree with that. I think we try to tailor fit all kids into a certain mold sometimes instead of tailoring what we're teaching them into the mold that they already are in, and where we can just kind of use the raw materials given to us and just refine them, right? Rather than trying to completely transform who a child naturally is. Pretty good. Sacred Fire. I remember this was good. I read it, I don't know, a couple years ago. The one thing I really, that for whatever reason sticks out, is there's like a passage about how Jesus on the cross took, the evil of the world and converted it into something good, and how we need to be like him. We need to take what's given to us, and instead of, let's say, evil, let's say harm, and we need to not multiply that into the world by doing the same thing back to people, but instead, even when people despitefully use us, persecute us, hate us, we should transform that into love toward others, which is exactly what Christ did on the earth. Josephus, he's interesting because he was a Jewish historian that was born, I think, right after Jesus maybe died. I mean, he was within that century, the first century. And he talks about the history of the Jews. One thing I specifically remember is he does talk about Christ, but he also talks about John the Baptist. He also talks about how there were people that he knew of that still were able to go to the site of Noah's Ark and actually pull pieces of the ark, the wooden pieces that were, centuries old, and take those home as memorabilia. And so that I found fascinating, because obviously we don't know where the ark would be at this point. I know it was said to have landed on Mount Ararat in the Bible, but there are lots of there's a lot of speculation about where it may be today, but there may not be any left. I mean, these people may have just completely disassembled it, and it may just be lost to history at this point. All right, I'm almost finished here. Let's see. Derek, is his name Derek Prince? Yeah, Derek Prince. I've got a couple of his books. And again, this is my Christian shelf. So, Husbands and Fathers, Secrets of a Prayer Warrior. He's pretty good. He's got some interesting insights. 7 Habits of Highly... That's not Christian. Let's see. Dumbing Us Down. I just recently, and I don't know why this is on this shelf, really. But I'll show you. I mean, it's basically this guy, Gatto, John Taylor Gatto. He was in the teaching profession for decades and won Best Teacher of the Year awards. And basically, he says that the public education system is terrible. That its goal is to conform kids to society's standards, to get rid of originality, to get rid of the entrepreneurial spirit, that original spirit that we were talking about, and to just get people, the mass of people, to submit, to comply with whatever the ruling class wants them to comply with. So he points out how, kids are taught, they're just basically we try to put them all into that same mold that I was talking about earlier, and to like how a school is set up similar to a factory. They hear the bell and they know that it's on to the next thing. It would be the same in a factory, right? Hear the bell, and it doesn't matter what they were in the middle of learning, if they were passionate about it, if they were having a great conversation with someone, a great dialogue, if they were still learning something that really piqued their interest, well, it doesn't matter, because you gotta be within the system, right? And so that was his whole point, is that we're not actually nurturing or cultivating a love for learning and a curiosity that will lead to the innovative spirit of someone, the the ingenious spirit of someone. But no, instead we're like, nope, we're going to try to make you just a tool, right, in society. So, highly recommend it. He gave me a lot of insights. I highlighted a bunch. Again, maybe I'll go over excerpts of certain books as this channel evolves. I don't know. Systematic theology. I'm not a huge fan of systematic theology, to be honest. I think a lot of the time when we try to systematically look at theology, it's almost becomes formulaic. It almost becomes as though we think God is a mechanism rather than a interpersonal person who cares for us, loves us, treats us uniquely out of that love, just like we would a child. We should a child. So I don't know. I've read some of it. I think this comes from a reformed perspective, which a lot of the systematic theology books do. And there are certainly principles and laws that God follows and abides by and wants us to, and promises that have been made. But I think sometimes we make it as though it's like A plus B equals C, when truly, for instance, let's say what comes to mind is when the Pharisees were talking to Jesus, and he healed someone on the Sabbath, or I think at one point he plucked some corn to eat, and the Pharisees came at him and said, "How dare you work on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said, "Well, listen, the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath." And so they were so formulaic, and he's like, "Listen, you're missing the point. The Sabbath was made for man. The Bible was given for man as a guide, as a foundation for our lives." And so it's not necessarily yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about it, but and I don't know if I'm properly explaining my thoughts as I'm trying to flesh them out right now, but haven't read that yet fully. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to read systematic theology. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes I think it can lead us astray sometimes. And then my Bibles, John Milton. Here we go, John Milton. I think this is the second to last book I'll show you on this shelf. John Milton. This is a lot of his poems, including Paradise Lost, but he has so much rich, like a lot of richness to what he says about education, about how to educate children, which I'm going to try to implement with my kids. Okay, I don't want to go on. I got interrupted, sorry, but I don't want to go on too much longer. I want to try to keep these videos around 30 minutes. So yes, highly recommend John Milton's works. He delves into theology, specifically some controversial, well, I don't know about controversial subjects, but he has some interesting takes on things like the Trinity, on things like predestination, on things like polygamy. He is brilliant, honestly. And so this is John Milton, the complete poems in major prose by Hughes. Then it also says Macmillan here. I don't know if you can... Macmillan. I don't know if you can easily find this, but I mean, this guy, I have a lot of respect for him, and I just sometimes crack this open just to glean some wisdom, some knowledge from him. So yeah, recommend him. Last one that I'm going to show you on this shelf. This is called Disciplines of a Godly Man by Kent Hughes. So Kent Hughes, I think he's a pastor. He talks about what a good godly man who's modeling Christ what kind of disciplines, what kind of practices he should have. And I've been recently rereading this, and so I mean, I would say my take is that he's just basically saying, like, live what you say you believe, right? Read scripture, lead your families, worship with them, pray, like really connect with God, who you say that you trust in and believe in. Really connect with those in your life that you say you love, because one of the commandments is that Jesus said is all encompassing of the entire law is love your neighbor as yourself, and then also to love God with all your mind, heart, soul, strength. So this just talks about the various practices, disciplines is what he calls them, of a godly man, and how to become more Christ-like, more of a light in this world, to become more respectable, not from a worldly perspective, but from a perspective of a leader in the church and a leader in your home. So, yeah, that's the second shelf, guys. That's the second shelf. Some of these books, you could definitely do without. Some of them, though, I highly recommend, as I've said. I think the next video we'll go over this third shelf. A lot of this discusses more about manhood, more about I would say philosophy. Let's see, we do have some other interesting books here that I can go over. We got church history here, so yeah, I need to really organize these shelves better. But I'll go over this third shelf probably soon, and I hope somebody's getting something out of this. I appreciate you listening. Let me know what your takes are. Let me know of any books that you think I should add to my second shelf here, the kind of on Christianity, whether it's Christian living or theology or history or philosophy, morality, whatever the case. Again, thank you guys for listening. Until next time, out.